But what's cool is there are people out there who are finding the truth, and they're finding the truth without care of the cost of it. It's just because it's the right thing to do. And this next man is one of them, Dr. Stephen Davis. He is talking about the real deal on AIDS. And when I asked him, I said, a lot of people aren't going to like this. They got a lot of money tied up, a lot of programs, a lot of paradigms. And he's like, I don't care. It's truth. And so I'm happy to have mine. Stephen Davis is a former Arizona State Senator and physician's assistant. He won the George Washington Medal of Honor for Freedom Foundation at Valley Forge 1975 for publishing his article, The Government versus the Economy. And he has spent the last 10 years researching the HIV AIDS controversy. He's got a book out, Wrongful Death, the AIDS Trial. I can speak. And let's welcome Dr. Stephen Davis to Feet the Fire. Welcome.
Thank you, James. It's good to talk to you again.
Yes. You know what? I've heard other things here and there about some of the things you put down here, and here it is, all there, put in a book, and you have 900 medical and scientific references backing this up. This isn't something channeled. This isn't something that somebody kind of felt out or thought up. I mean, this is something that any scientist, any doctor, anybody who was a technical kind of person can simply read this stuff and say, wait a minute, we've been given a bill of goods here.
Well, James, that's why I wrote my book, actually. I wanted to take all that scientific material and put it into an easily readable text that anybody can understand. Actually, I did it for myself to make sure I understood. And so I ended up writing a novel. I started on this, as you said, about 10 years ago, and I wrote a medical paper for the Internet, and in that paper I suggested that people who had lost a loved one to AIDS from 1987 to 1997 should file class action suits against the drug company GlaxoSmithKline because their loved one died of the drug AZT, not from AIDS itself or HIV. And frankly, James, I thought I was finished with the issue at that point. But 7 years later, no one had filed a class action suit. There were many private suits filed and settled by the drug company, part of that settlement being that nothing ever be made public. And so the truth never came out in court. And I finally decided, well, I'm simply going to write a novel about a class action lawsuit as if it took place, putting all the information there that anybody could understand in sworn testimony, and see how the trial comes out. And of course, it comes out proving that HIV cannot cause AIDS, does not cause AIDS, that 95% of the deaths from AIDS from 1987 to 1997 were due to the drug AZT, which was being given to people who had AIDS, and AZT itself was so lethal that it literally resulted in over 300,000 deaths. And so that was the crux of that book. But today, James, we have two very disastrous situations going on. One of them is that we are diagnosing people HIV positive as a result of very unreliable HIV tests that have been proven to be wrong as much as 90% of the time. And then we're prescribing lethal HIV drugs to these people. Even the AIDS establishment admits that more than half of the deaths from AIDS today are not from HIV, but from the side effects of the drugs they're being given. That's one problem. The other problem, of course, is AIDS in Africa, which is an entirely different situation, but just as tragic. And so I don't know where you want to begin because there is so much to cover. And obviously the whole point is HIV does not cause AIDS. It fails every medical and scientific test to be the cause of AIDS. The HIV tests are very fraudulent. They do not find HIV, and they are diagnosing people incorrectly. And the drugs that people are being given are killing them. So where do you want to start?
Well, I'd like to start there where HIV cannot cause AIDS. This is not the first time I've heard it. Hulda Clark, with her Zapper treatment and all this stuff, in a book called The Cure for AIDS, and she went through 70 cases of people who were HIV positive, and after she was done, they were HIV negative, and she said back then that it wasn't the cause of AIDS. So what is HIV?
Oh, well, that's a really good question, James, and I wish there were a simple answer. There are a lot of scientists today who are not even sure the virus called HIV even exists. It has never been isolated according to the standards that have always been used to isolate something called a retrovirus, which is what HIV is. It has never been photographed with an electron microscope. No one actually has ever seen the thing. So that's our first problem. But HIV is supposed to be what is called a retrovirus. It's one of a class of viruses. Now, no other retrovirus, and there are thousands of them that have been found, no other retrovirus has ever been proven to cause a human being any harm. But on April 23rd, 1984, Dr. Robert Gallo stood up in a press conference in Washington, D.C., and announced that this little retrovirus called HIV causes AIDS. Well, there were a lot of problems with that press conference. First of all, he never submitted his work to his peers for peer review. In other words, in medical science and scientific research, you always do an experiment that you publish it, you see if other researchers can duplicate your findings, and then you make an announcement. Well, Gallo didn't do that. He just stood up and said, HIV causes AIDS. But the problem is HIV fails every single medical and scientific test to be called the cause of AIDS. For example, for over 100 years now, we have been using a set of criteria developed by Dr. Robert Koch in the late 1890s to determine what is the cause of an infectious disease. He came up with 4 simple rules, and rule number 1 says that if you think something causes a disease, you have to find that something in every case of a disease. Now, this makes perfect sense. It's just logical. In every case of tuberculosis, you better find the tuberculosis bacterium if you're going to say that that's what causes tuberculosis. In every case of smallpox, you better find the smallpox virus if you want to say that causes smallpox. Well, there are thousands of cases on record of AIDS with people with AIDS who have no HIV, who are HIV negative. That right there should tell us this isn't possible. It's not logical. It doesn't meet the standards that are required for HIV to cause AIDS. But the third of Dr. Koch's rules was that you have to take this thing you think causes the disease and inject it into a normally healthy body. And we don't inject it into humans for obvious ethical reasons, but we inject it into chimpanzees. You have to inject it into chimpanzees, and they must also develop the same disease. But for 22 years now, they have been injecting HIV into chimpanzees, and James, guess what? Not one has ever developed AIDS.
Let me stop for 1 second. There's a little confusion.
Yeah.
This book is a fictional story. You've created a courtroom drama, but what is in the book is facts.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Every word of testimony in the court case is based on the over 900 medical and scientific references that are in the book itself, which you mentioned. So the only thing fictional about this is the setting, is the court case itself.
Okay, I just want to make, because that's going to come up throughout the week as people pop in and out listening tonight. So that it is a fictional book, but it's just the container is a story to convey fact.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
So we have HIV, which has people have AIDS without having HIV, and it has not caused any other problems with anybody. How do these things get started? How does this ball get rolling like this, where it gets so far out now? For anybody to admit there's a problem would mean the complete revamping of our medical system. People even in prison, and people have been killed because of diagnosing. I mean, it's like the car is like completely. How does it get started?
Well, as I said, it got started with the announcement in 1984 by Dr. Robert Gallo.
So why didn't somebody nip it in the bud? Why didn't somebody go, look, where's your stuff? What about this? What about that? I mean, how did it get going?
Well, you know about the perfect storm, right?
Right.
Well, conditions were absolutely perfect at that time for this kind of lie to take hold and become accepted. For the AIDS had first been identified in 1981, and for those first 3 years, everybody believed that it was caused by a drug called amyl nitrite. They're commonly called poppers, and they were in widespread use in the gay community. We can talk about that more if you want. But AIDS was not going to get any funding if it was limited to the gay community. The gay community did not like the fact that it was being attached to their lifestyle. And so they, in particular, wanted to find a different cause. The Centers for Disease Control at that time was looking for some cause. The war on cancer, Nixon's war on cancer, was just ending. It had failed also. And there were a lot of scientists at the National Institutes of Health and the Centers for Disease Control who were desperately looking for a disease that would occupy their time and justify their funding. So that was also in place. There were just a number of factors that when Robert Gallo stood up and said HIV caused AIDS, everybody got on the bandwagon. And it meant, of course, that this was not going to be limited to the gay community, that it was not something the gays had brought on themselves. And it was going to require immediate political support and funding. And, of course, today it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, $19 billion alone in 2006 to the Department of Health and Human Services for AIDS. Far, far more than is being given to cancer research, which kills 500,000 a year, and heart disease, which kills 700,000 a year, while AIDS today is taking about 15,000 lives a year. So it's snowballed. There are literally thousands of people whose livelihood and lives depend on HIV causing AIDS, who obviously are not going to give up that viewpoint very easily. It is just literally out of control. And the Centers for Disease Control just recently has now said that they want everybody in this country, everyone in the U.S., tested for HIV. So we're going to unfortunately find a lot more people being diagnosed HIV positive very soon, and more people being put on the HIV drugs. And, of course, that's the pharmaceutical company. So, I mean, the pharmaceutical companies are just, they're making $1 billion off of this as well. I have to say this. There are a lot of people ask me, do you think this was a conspiracy? I do not think it was a conspiracy. I don't think that somebody or some mistake created HIV to wipe out a particular segment of the population. But I will say that after this megalomaniac, Dr. Robert Gallo, who wanted more than anything a Nobel Prize, after he made his announcement, it has simply become a boondoggle, a cash cow, whatever. And as you know, those are hard to give up.
And it's like these things, and this is why it's so important that people be really careful when they first hear something, is that if this would have been checked right at the beginning, look at all the events that wouldn't have happened. And now it's so far down the line that people, I mean, it's like when Hitler started putting Jews in the oven, it got out of hand, and you had to either go all the way to, like, death, destruction, because there's no turning back. And now, with all the people dying from this, they just have to keep going, and it's got to stop.
Well, I will want to say that it took 3 years, but in 1987, Dr. Peter Duesberg, who was then known as one of the world's leading retrovirologists, published a paper showing that HIV could not be the cause of AIDS. Now, one of the reasons it took Peter 3 years was because Dr. Gallo, first of all, had lied about discovering HIV. That's been proven, and it caused an international stir with France. We could talk about that if you'd like. He lied on the patent application for the HIV test, for which he made $1.7 million. He jealously guarded his discovery so that only people that were his friends could do any research with it. So Gallo made it virtually impossible for anybody to challenge him. And as I said, it took 3 years, and Dr. Peter Duesberg published the definitive paper that HIV could not cause AIDS. That's 1987. But by that time, we already had AZT approved through the FDA as a drug to start giving to people who were HIV positive. We had the pharmaceutical companies involved. We had, as I said, it was a snowball. And so when Peter published his paper in 1987, and we have this memo, the CDC sent out a memo and said, we have to contain this. And the word contain is in quotes. So there was already an immediate reaction to say we have to stop any dissension or any discussion about whether HIV causes AIDS or not. Now, what Peter Duesberg went through is unbelievable. He lost all of his grants. He was denied access to the media. I have an entire chapter in my book, Wrongful Death, the AIDS Trial, talking about all the things that happened to Peter to absolutely squash him. And finally, Peter wrote a book in 1996 called Inventing the AIDS Virus. Now, this is a big 700-page book, and it's scientifically written, but it is absolutely fascinating. And again, it is the definitive work on this subject. But other researchers looked around and saw what happened to Peter, and they knew that if they spoke up, they were liable to lose their grants. They were liable to lose their livelihood, their jobs, and everything. Now, today, there are 2,300 of the world's leading scientists and researchers and doctors and chiropractors and journalists and professionals who all agree that HIV does not cause AIDS. They are parts of something called the Group for the Scientific Reappraisal of the HIV-AIDS Hypothesis. Their website is rethinkingaids.com. And so these are 2,300 very courageous individuals who stood up and said, this can't not be true. At personal risk, at financial risk, and they are going to, in the end, be seen finally as the heroes of this tragedy.
Well, I talk to many people who are very cynical, and they say, well, it's all about money, it's all about this. But I really try to look at it from all sides, because usually it's never as bad as one angle says it is. And I would agree with you that I don't know if any of these people started out to defraud and kill people. But this is the time we're living in. I go off on a tirade talking about the spiritual time we're living in, is that the stakes are higher for doing the right thing, and the effects are faster. And here is an example where someone was a little lazy, looking for a little glory, looking for some money, and look at where it ended up. So, I mean, this is a great, terrible example of what can happen when someone, doesn't tell the truth. We already have questions coming in. I'm going to stack them up and go along. Can you answer technical questions about this, about the AIDS along the way?
I am not a scientist. I'm not a medical doctor. I have done an awful lot of research on this subject, so if I cannot answer it, I will definitely refer you to the scientific studies that can.
Okay, well, that's fair enough. Because some of the things we're coming into now is, since we're talking about HIV not being related to AIDS, and then people developing AIDS, and people dying from AIDS, and people spending a lot of money to treat AIDS, how is it that AIDS, and in fact this question, I'm going to read it directly here. The epidemic took off in heterosexual partners of men who admitted gay sex in the early 90s. How did these partners contract the disease?
I'm sorry, did they say heterosexual partners?
Yeah, the epidemic took off in heterosexual partners of men who admitted having gay relations in the early 90s.
No, that's not true.
Okay.
First of all, the epidemic took off basically in 1987 when AZT was approved by the FDA to treat people with AIDS. And then within a couple of years, they began giving it to people who weren't even sick, but were simply HIV positive. And AZT is the most toxic drug ever developed. It was actually developed in 1964 as a treatment for cancer, a chemotherapy, but it was never allowed on the market because it was so toxic to the human body. AZT destroyed the human immune system, and that is what AIDS is. In other words, AZT actually caused AIDS. It caused 95% of the AIDS cases from 1987 to 1997, when it was finally found to be so toxic that they dropped the monotherapy full dose regimen. Now, by the early 1990s, there were the cases were still climbing. I think they peaked in 1993. However, this was not in the heterosexual community. As a matter of fact, the most famous study is called the Padian study. It was done by a researcher, an AIDS researcher called Nancy Padian, and she studied discordant couples. That is, one of the partners is HIV positive and one is HIV negative. And what she wanted to find out was how many times they had to have sex before the HIV negative partner became HIV positive. That's called a seroconversion. She studied these couples for as much as 6 years, and the end result was at the end of those 6 years, not one of the HIV negative of the couples had become HIV positive. The fact is, HIV is not transmitted through heterosexual sex.
Is it transmitted through gay sex, then? I mean, in other words, is it related to the actual sexual contact, or is it related to the type of sexual contact?
If HIV exists, and if it is transmitted through homosexual sex, it is because it is transmitted through blood.
Blood. Okay, so it's blood. So it's a blood issue, not which, part you use, so to speak.
Yes, that is correct. We know HIV, if it exists, is transmitted through the blood. Hemophiliacs have become HIV positive. Other blood transmissions have occurred. We also know that it's transmitted from the mother, genetically. And as a matter of fact, this is one of the biggest problems, James. The CDC today says that 40,000 people a year are being newly infected with HIV. They cannot say that, and I'll tell you why. Because they do not have a prior HIV negative test to say that these people are being newly infected. These people could have been born HIV positive because there have been people living with HIV for 20, 30 years now who have never gotten sick as long as they don't take the drugs. And HIV is an old virus. Peter Duesberg proved that. This HIV didn't just crop up in 1981. So the CDC cannot say that there are people being newly infected when they do not have proof that they were HIV negative prior to an HIV positive test.
Okay, so it's newly discovered, I guess. Is this related to, like, people who have the mouth sores, that kind of deal where 90% of the people have them and some are born with them from their mother? I mean, that rather benign condition?
Well, yeah, it is. As I said, it can be passed on from the mother to the child. And first of all, we don't know what HIV actually does. We know it can't cause AIDS. Okay. I mean, I gave you 2 reasons. There are like 3 or 4 more that are just as startling. So we know HIV can't cause AIDS, but we don't have any idea what it might do in a human body, if anything.
Yeah, I mean, if anything.
Yeah, Peter Duesberg says it's a harmless passenger virus, like the rest of the retroviruses in that class. I like to say that having HIV is no more dangerous than having green eyes and brown hair. And as a matter of fact, I have been willing to go on national television and inject myself with HIV-positive blood to show that I can walk my talk. That hasn't happened yet. Maybe it will someday. But after everything I have studied, I am absolutely 100% convinced HIV cannot cause AIDS, and yet we don't know what effect it might have in a human body, if anything.
Hmm. So the AIDS condition is a condition, and therefore it can be passed, if I can use that term, by environmental conditions, for example.
Well, first of all, let's make sure we're separating HIV from AIDS.
Okay, I said HIV, didn't I? Yeah, okay. AIDS.
No, you said AIDS.
Oh,
AIDS
okay.
is the condition, and you're right. AIDS is a syndrome. It is a collection, of 30 different diseases that we have known for a long time and have their own cures for a long time, and now they're defined as AIDS. And here's where we run across another problem. The definition of AIDS has changed drastically over time, since 1981. One of the things that a virus must do, let me put it a different way. If a virus is going to be the cause of disease, a virus cannot differentiate between men and women. It has to affect men and women equally. Well, 90% of the AIDS cases in the 80s and 90s were men. So the CDC was very upset about this. In 1993, they changed the definition of AIDS to include cervical cancer. Now, remember, AIDS is supposed to be an immune deficiency. Cervical cancer is not. How did it get on the list? It got on the list because the CDC wanted more women being diagnosed with AIDS. And they got it. Now it's only 83% men and 17% women. That still doesn't make a 50-50 split. But the definition of AIDS is one of the causes of AIDS. Let me give you another example. They also now define AIDS as being HIV positive and having a T-cell count of 200 or less. A T-cell is an indicator, T-cell count is an indicator of the human immune system and how well it's functioning. Well, if you are HIV positive and you have a T-cell count of 200 or less, you are now diagnosed with AIDS, even if you have no symptoms, even if you're not sick. And as a matter of fact, more than half of the cases diagnosed as AIDS today fall into this category. People are not sick. They only have a T-cell count less than 200. Now, here's the most remarkable thing. Canada does not recognize that criteria, that diagnosis. So if you're diagnosed with AIDS in the United States, as half of the people are from this T-cell count definition, all you have to do is to move to Canada and you no longer have AIDS. Now, you tell me any other disease in the world that changes its definition from country to country.
Well, that, before we go on, I was holding something in my memory back when you mentioned about the cervical cancer. I understood from people who I know, some people close that went through a pre-cancer condition, which was explained to them as being caused by their body trying to become immune to their partner. And since this, one individual a while back had told me this, had many partners, their body went into an AIDS type of condition, though the word AIDS wasn't used, immune problem, from trying to become immune to these numbers of partners. And cervical cancer has been tied to the step after this condition. Is that a possible way that can kind of be brought in under the umbrella, or is this misinformation?
I'm not sure I followed all of that, James. So I'm not sure I can answer that question. AIDS, of course, is an immune deficiency. They're a syndrome. There are lots of things that can cause immune deficiency. I mentioned, for example, that starting in 1981, we had AIDS showing up in the gay community. And there were a lot of gay men using a drug called amyl nitrite, commonly called poppers. Right. And they used it because it is the perfect gay drug. And I won't go into detail about why. Okay. But it allowed gay men to have 40 to 50 sexual encounters a day if they would do 40 to 50 hits of this amyl nitrite. Well, amyl nitrite is known to destroy the human immune system, to cause immune deficiency. It is also known to turn many classes of antibiotics into carcinogens, and there was a widespread use of antibiotic use in the gay community at the time as well. And so this is one thing that causes immune deficiency. There's a lot of other things that cause immune deficiency. We intentionally cause immune deficiency in some cases, like in organ transplants and anything that we want to stop the body from rejecting, we give people drugs like chemotherapy to destroy their immune system. So this was a well-known phenomenon, immune deficiency, for a long time. But what happened is that we had this immune deficiency showing up without a known cause, and that's what became AIDS. So there are lots of things. Stress. Stress is the biggest cause of immune deficiency, to be honest. You can have a CD4 count, a T cell count of a spread of as much as 1,000 in one 24-hour period. And so our immune system goes up and down during the day depending on a lot of factors, including environmental. So I'm not sure whether I'm even approaching an answer to your question.
Okay.
Except to say that there are a lot of things that can cause.
Okay. All right. Well, that is a good thing to come away from it. Is that there's a lot of cause. It's a syndrome, and that HIV is not the cause. Here's another question that's coming in. Are you saying that no one can get it from a partner or a blood transfusion or a blood exchange? If someone is taking AZT and they have a blood exchange with a person, could that other person then get AIDS? I mean, in other words, people are getting AIDS apparently from blood transfers. Or are we talking just about HIV?
Well, yes. Again, we have to differentiate between HIV and AIDS. AIDS is a disease syndrome that one would get for various reasons.
Okay.
HIV not being one of them. Now we're talking about the transmission of this retrovirus called HIV.
Right.
HIV can be transmitted. There is no question. It can be transmitted in the blood. I don't understand the question.
Okay, all right. Let me say it this way. I think I got it. I think I got what the question is here. Is that what you are saying is if a person has HIV, they could transfer it to a partner with a blood exchange. And then perhaps at that point the partner panics, oh, I got HIV now. They start taking ATZ, which then creates the AIDS in the partner. But a partner who has the actual syndrome cannot pass the syndrome to another partner in and of itself.
That's correct.
Okay.
AIDS is not something that is contagious. As a matter of fact, neither is HIV, although it can be passed.
Right. It's not
from
contagious.
One person or other through the blood. The CDC tried to tell us years ago that AIDS was this very contagious thing that is going to spread throughout the world and throughout our population, including women and heterosexual couples. And it didn't turn out to be true. As a matter of fact, in 1984, the CDC started counting the number of HIV positives there were in the United States. And at that time, they estimated there were 1 million HIV positives. Today, they are still trying to count HIV positives. And today, they estimate that there are 1 million HIV positives in the United States. In other words, the number has never changed. It actually went down a little bit during the height of the AIDS epidemic in the early 90s, but it's now back up to 1 million. Now, a contagious virus doesn't act that way, you know. And if you look at the graph of AIDS, deaths from AIDS, it goes up in this huge bell curve, late 80s, early 90s, and then comes back down. Meanwhile, the people infected, so-called, with HIV stays absolutely the same. You can't have that. That's another reason why HIV can't cause AIDS. You cannot have HIV as the cause of AIDS with AIDS going off the chart and the number of HIV people staying the same. It just doesn't work.
Okay, I think we're going to make a real lot of ground here with information with people. So I'm going to pop these in along the way here, and wherever we're going, hopefully we can stop and deal with it. Because what is a possible scenario here is HIV is exchanged through blood. The partner gets nervous, starts taking ATZ, gets AIDS like the partner, and dies. And the whole point is either one of these, I mean, the first person may have developed AIDS. Either one of these people would be alive today because one merely got tested for HIV, started taking ATZ. The partner then goes, oh, I got it too. He takes HIV, and they both die.
Yeah. Let me clarify. The drug is called AZT.
Okay.
It is no longer, since 1997, it has not been given in the strength that it was given those first 10 years. It is still today in two of the drug cocktails. One's called Combivir, the other's called Trizavir, and they both are made by GlaxoSmithKline, and they both contain 600 milligrams of AZT. Is there proof that that AZT is not killing people today? No, there is no proof of that. Is there proof that it is killing? No. And I'll tell you why. You can't run a study and separate out the effect of that 600 milligrams of AZT apart from the other cocktail drugs that are included. So there is no way to say. We still know people are dying today from AIDS, as I said. I mean, I don't want to belittle this. I mean, it's not as many, obviously. We were losing 50,000 a year back in 1993. Today it's about 15,000. And even the AIDS establishment admits that half of those, more than half of those, are dying from liver failure and organ failure, which is a side effect of the drugs, the HIV drugs they are taking, not HIV. So we are really losing, maybe 6,000, 7,000 people to AIDS these days, not necessarily from the side effects of the drugs. So people are still dying, and this is unacceptable. You know, I'm not, as I say, I'm not trying to make light of this. But the point is that there is still use of poppers, of amyl nitrite in the gay community, so people are destroying their immune system that way. There's a lot of other things, a lot of environmental factors, a lot of other drugs that are destroying our immune systems. And if you happen to be diagnosed as HIV positive and you are destroying your immune system with one of these various things, then, you know, you can get AIDS.
Actually, you're going in an area that I was going to go in, and maybe we should bring in Africa before I go to that other part. What is happening in Africa with the spread of AIDS there? Are they getting the drugs that are spreading it, or is there an environmental pollutant issue in their area?
Well, now we're into a whole different situation. AIDS in Africa has an entirely different definition. First of all, you do not have to be HIV positive to have AIDS in Africa. And frankly, they are testing very, very few people in Africa. The people they are testing are pregnant women right after they've given birth. That is the biggest group of people who are being tested for HIV, and they are showing up HIV positive, and then they're taking that number and extrapolating it to the whole population. That's how we get these incredibly overblown figures of HIV positives in Africa. Now, pregnancy is one of those things that causes a false positive reaction on the HIV test. And this is what they're doing in Africa. They're giving these women who just delivered a baby, they're giving them an HIV test. They are showing up HIV positive, probably from their pregnancy, and they're saying, oh, lo and behold, we have these millions of people in Africa who are HIV positive. It's just simply not true. It's not true. AIDS in Africa, as I said, you don't have to be HIV positive. All you need is a persistent cough, a persistent fever, persistent diarrhea, and weight loss of 10% or more of your body. James, those are the symptoms of malnutrition and poverty. That's what's going on in Africa.
But are they shipping the drugs to them? Is this like a World Health Organization? Are they using these cocktails to try and treat this, quote unquote, this?
Oh, yeah, that's the big fad these days with Oprah and with this, even Sprint's on the bandwagon. If you've seen their recent commercial, this whole red thing, people want to ship all these drugs that have been admitted to kill at least half of our AIDS cases in this country. They want to send them over to Africa. The pharmaceutical company is the largest lobby in the United States. It is the most powerful lobby, and look, all you have to do is watch television, and every day you'll see a new disease that shows up, whether it's restless leg syndrome, or sudden anxiety disorder, or PAD, what's that stand for? Anyway, all these new diseases and these new drugs that are going to cure you. And the pharmaceutical industry has gotten a hold of our society, and they are fueling this fire in Africa so that we will buy a lot of drugs from them and ship them to Africa, and we'll all feel good about it.
Now what we're saying here, I mean, doctor, this is the bottom line. This is the very bottom line, is that they are looking at a condition, and they're calling it AIDS. They are given these drugs, which are indeed causing AIDS. This is a question of treating poor people without good water and food and poverty. They're treating poverty with genocide.
That's right.
This is genocide.
It is, James. You have hit it on the head. I have videotape, James, of a women's hospital in Africa, in a TB ward. They went in and they tested all the women for HIV. Now, tuberculosis is another thing that causes a false positive reaction on the HIV test. 90% of the women in this TB ward came out HIV positive. What did they do? They stopped their TB medications. And when they were asked why, the nurses said, they're going to die anyway from AIDS. Why waste the TB medication? This is the kind of criminal tragedy that is going on every day, right now, in this country and in Africa. In this country, we're doing virtually the same thing. We're diagnosing people as HIV positive based on very fraudulent tests, and they're being pressured into taking these HIV drugs. In a minute, I hope we'll get into these HIV tests, because this is what's current. This is what's happening. I get calls every day. People who were just diagnosed HIV positive, and imagine if you were. It totally ruins your life. The emotional stress, the psychological trauma, the family stress, and the financial hardship, and the social rejection that comes along with an HIV positive diagnosis is unbelievable. And these people live in fear for the rest of their lives, because we have been told for 22 years, you are going to get AIDS. It is absolutely criminal what we're doing to these people these days.
Well, I'm wondering if we should get into the test, but I'm wondering if have you talked with leaders who are going in trying to help in Africa and in these areas? Have you talked with people, or do you know of people who have mentioned these things? Are they just not hearing it yet? They don't believe it, because how could this possibly be happening with all these great and wonderful companies and people? And how is this allowed to continue? There's no one. I mean, there's people out there who really care, and they're over there really trying to help people. And
absolutely. For years, the president of South Africa, Thabo Mbeki, refused to allow the drugs in his country. And he kept saying, bring me vitamins, bring me food, bring me clean water. And you cannot imagine the amount of abuse that he took. And, you know, it's not easy to get an audience with Oprah or Bono, you know, or something like that. I would love to sit down with some of these people who are leading this charge and just have 15 minutes to show them the science. You know, this is what bothers me so much. Nobody looks at the science. Again, I have people call me and they say, well, here's what my doctor told me. And I respond with the scientific studies that show that's not true. And I ask them, go back to your doctor. Ask him for the scientific studies that support what he has told you. And I will tell you, 99 times out of 100, they cannot produce it. They have never read it. They don't even know whether it exists. And in fact, it doesn't exist. It is just a mantra that they carry out. James has become a religious fervor.
Well, yeah, I've seen it in other things. I mean, I've seen it in, like, operating systems. I've seen it in, you know, I'd rather push my Ford than drive a Chevy. But now we're talking about killing people.
Yeah. If you challenge the idea that HIV causes AIDS, or if you suggest that the HIV test is not 100% accurate, or if you even say, you know, I would really look before you take those HIV drugs and find out what's actually happening with them, you're told that you are a denialist and, you know, linked to the Holocaust. And you are told that you are suggesting that people not have safe sex. That's not true. I believe people ought to have safe sex, but not because of HIV. because it isn't transmitted sexually. And as a matter of fact, it's been proven condoms do not stop the passage of HIV through the little spaces in the latex.
I'm starting to get mad.
I'm glad.
I'm having a hard time dealing with this. I mean, I know that they're treating cancer with drugs that aren't really helping, and I've studied Hilda Clark's stuff, and I actually have a zapper. I've used her system, and I've cured some stuff that I had, and I know that, but there's something about this that it makes it even worse. I mean, this is like God. I mean, this is like the worst.
Well, it certainly is a tragedy, and it just keeps getting bigger every day, and we're going to need more and more people to go out to their window and yell, "I'm mad as hell, and I'm not going to take it anymore."
No, listen, I play that in the top for, it's for local commercials at the top, but some people pull it, don't put anything on it. So some people hear it, some people don't. But that's a quote from a 1976 movie where that person who spoke such great words was, of course, a crazy man in the movie. It's like, it's bad when the crazy people are the ones that are right. I mean, what is that? I mean, God.
Well, we don't even know who is HIV positive. And this gets us back to the tests. The tests are so unreliable. Let me just...
Okay, let's do that, because that's another question again. Let's go with the tests.
Yeah. And right off the bat, I want to give people a website to go to. It is helpforhiv.com. Helpforhiv.com. On that website, you can see all the scientific studies that support what I'm saying, because I don't want anybody to believe me just because I'm saying it. I want people to read the stuff for themselves. Now, the HIV tests, first of all, it is documented that there can be as much as 90% false positive reactions.
Oh, God.
90%. Now, this includes simple things like having had a flu shot or a tetanus shot sometime before you took the HIV test, having a cold when you took the test, having had herpes or hepatitis sometime in your life. There's a list of over 70 different conditions proven by 50 scientific studies that cause false positive reactions on an HIV test. Secondly, this is not really an HIV test. It's called that. People even think it might be a test for AIDS. It's not a test for AIDS. It's not a test for HIV. It's a test for the antibodies to HIV, supposedly. Well, in every other case, having the antibodies to a virus means that we are now immune from whatever disease that virus could cause. That is the entire theory and basis of vaccinations. In vaccinations, you give people a little bit of the virus, like in a smallpox vaccination or a flu shot, and they develop antibodies to those viruses so that their body can fight off any kind of future infection. Having the antibodies to HIV, there is no scientific study to show why that should be dangerous rather than a good thing. I mean, really, people who are diagnosed HIV positive should actually be thankful that they have the antibodies in their body to fight HIV. But for some reason, we've gotten that totally screwed up and say that people who are HIV antibody positive are likely to get AIDS. That doesn't make any sense. So these tests have never been validated. In other words, to validate an antibody test, like an HIV antibody test, what you need to do is you need to take 1,000 people or even 100 people. Frankly, today, I would be willing to take 50 people who tested HIV positive, and then you go find the HIV virus in their blood. In other words, you get a direct correlation between the test result and the presence of the virus in their blood. And conversely, you take 50 people who were HIV negative, and you go look at their blood, and they should not have it. That's how you validate an antibody test and how every other antibody test in the world has been validated. We have never done that with HIV, and one of the reasons is we can't find HIV in anybody's blood. not even people with AIDS. We can't find the active live HIV virus anywhere to be found. So the tests have never been validated. The list of things wrong with these tests goes on and on. The same blood was sent to 19 different laboratories and came back with 19 different results.
Oh, God.
The same blood was sent to the same laboratory 44 times, and over 40% of the time they got it wrong. And even if you are diagnosed, even if you have an HIV positive reaction, that has to be interpreted. There are 10 different ways to interpret an HIV test result from the laboratory to determine whether or not you're positive. 10 different ways depending on where you live in the world and what criteria you're using. Very honestly, you can be HIV positive in New York. You can fly to San Francisco and take the same test in a different place with a different laboratory and different set of criteria and be HIV negative. There is no consistency. There is no validation. These tests are absolutely bogus. There is no way to say anyone is HIV positive based on these test results.
I'm looking at that website, and there is an actual label from a test. And on the label it says, at present, there is no recognized standard for establishing the presence or absence of antibodies to HIV-1, HIV-2 in the human blood. Right at the test.
The manufacturers of these test kits, all of them, put in this disclaimer in every packet of tests that say you can't use this test to determine whether or not somebody has HIV antibodies. Isn't that crazy? Isn't that insane?
You know, I'm like embarrassed to even call myself like an sentient being. And looking at this stuff, we're sitting there accepting this all, and these are like about as simple, ridiculous refutations as you can come up with.
Yeah.
And it's like, and I'm like embarrassed to be called like an intelligent being after seeing this stuff.
Well, we have simply swallowed the authority line, hook, line, and sinker for so many years. Nobody asks questions anymore. That's all I'm asking people to do. Ask questions. Find out what they base these incredible claims on, and what studies they have to support their claims. They aren't there. Dr. Terry Mullis won the Nobel Prize in 1993 for the development of a special test called the PCR. He's a Nobel Prize winner. He went to look for the scientific documentation that would prove that HIV caused AIDS, which has to be there, he said. He still hasn't found it. Their scientific basis just doesn't exist. And it's amazing that we continue to not even ask for somebody to prove. If a doctor says to you, you should take an HIV test, he better tell you that HIV test is not based on a validated test, it is not accurate, it is not this, that. In other words, you should have informed consent before you even take an HIV test. And then if you've been diagnosed HIV positive as a result of a test, and he wants to give you these drugs, he better tell you that the drugs are killing more people than AIDS today. So, but nobody's asking questions. All I am trying to do is to get people to start asking questions before they kill themselves based on this lie.
Now, what I want to get at in here is that I looked at one of the links that was sent here, and there was a thing that was said in here that struck me. I could look at a page and something will jump out at me, is that it talks about AIDS having 3 times higher rate in African Americans and Hispanics than in white Americans. Isn't that a direct correlation to that the poverty level affects the minorities more than the white? And no?
James, I wish I could tell you why the majority of people today being diagnosed HIV positive in this country are African Americans, and why HIV might be so prevalent in the African continent. I don't know. Again, we don't know where HIV comes from or what it does. And, it could turn out to be some kind of connection with certain genetic makeup for all that matters. I don't know.
See, I got a little itch under me that says that AIDS is a reaction of the body's immune system from being overtaxed by, we'll call it chemicals. Pollutants would be two category word. That there is substances that certain people their immune system is constantly beating themselves, and finally the immune system starts to break down. And if we look along those lines and try to come up with an answer, it might not have anything to do with whether or not they were gay or black or in Africa or in America. It has to do with their what they're affected by chemically mixed in with their genetics ability to hold out long enough.
Now, you see, here's another problem. The definition of AIDS in the United States, not in Africa, but in the United States, is you must be HIV positive. In 1991, as a result of all the diagnosed AIDS cases on record with the Centers for Disease Control who were HIV negative, they created a new disease. It's called ICL. You have obviously never heard about it, or I would be surprised if you had. ICL is the diagnosis given to people with immune deficiency syndrome who are HIV negative. So as of 1991, there are no AIDS cases who are HIV negative. There are still people with, as you're calling it AIDS, and technically it is acquired immune deficiency syndrome. There are people who acquire immune deficiency through various means, environmental pollutants, whatever you want to call it, but they are not AIDS unless they are HIV positive in the United States. Now, the other thing you have to watch out for in these statistics that the CDC throws around, if you're HIV positive and you've been diagnosed with AIDS, perhaps because you had a CD4 count of less than 200 one day, and you die, and you're perfectly healthy, and you die in a car accident, you're an AIDS death.
Well, that's like I've seen that here in Chicago when it's hot out. Any reason why people die is because of heat.
Yeah, but if you're HIV positive and you're diagnosed with AIDS, if you die of heat, you're said to have died from AIDS. So that's how absolutely squirrely this definition has gotten, and the statistics have gotten.
I have another fast blast coming in here. This is from Randy. As a gay man, I have studied this lie for so many years, but when I tell gay men about it, they think I'm nuts, but no one looks at the lack of evidence, etc. Most of them just show up and get their drugs until they do become ill. I am in touch with many who don't take AVD for over 20 years and are healthy. The best we can do is expose the unreliability of the HIV test and have everyone refuse to take the test. It's business as usual for corporate America.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, there are many people out there who have been diagnosed HIV positive who refuse to take, they're called ARVs, he may have mistyped something, it's antiretroviral therapy, who refuse to take these drugs, and they're living healthy and happy lives. Take a look at Magic Johnson and take a look at Arthur Ashe. Let's just compare the two, because most people know those names. Arthur Ashe was diagnosed HIV positive. I think that was 1988. He immediately went on AZT because that was the drug of choice at that time. 3.5 years later, he's dead. This was a man at the prime of his life in top physical condition. As a matter of fact, I believe Arthur Ashe was probably the person who lived the longest taking AZT. No one else ever survived that long on AZT monotherapy full strength. Magic Johnson, on the other hand, was diagnosed HIV positive in November 1991. He went on AZT for 3 weeks, and then he got off of it. As a matter of fact, there was a joke going around the NBA in December. There's no AZT in Magic, and no Magic in AZT. And Magic Johnson stopped taking AZT. He stopped taking the antiretroviral drugs, and look at him today. He's a perfectly healthy human being, like thousands of other people who refuse to take these drugs. They're the ones that are healthy. They're the ones that are the survivors. As a matter of fact, the AIDS establishment has finally recognized a new category. They're called long-term non-progressives.
God.
People who have been HIV positive for, 10 to 20 to 30 years who have never gotten sick, and now they finally want to study them. Well, I hope they study them, because what they're going to find out is that these people didn't take their lousy drugs.
Yeah, I this goes back years ago on the subject of rabies, that Lucinda got bit by a dog, and they couldn't find the dog, so they gave her rabies shots. Turns out the rabies shots were out of date or something. She may correct me. There was some kind of they were spoiled. She became paralyzed one side of her arm because of this issue, and then through therapy, and she worked her way back. But if I ever got bit by a dog, what are the odds of that dog being how many rabid dogs do you see running around the streets? I'm not going to risk myself on this wild thing, and then you go and get sick from the actual thing itself. I mean, this is exactly what we're talking about here with AIDS.
Well, it is, but all people really need to do, if somebody tries to tell them to take these antiretroviral drugs, all they need to do is to take a look at the insert that comes with the drugs and look at the side effects, and they will see things they don't want. And those side effects, as I said in the last hour, are causing more deaths than AIDS from HIV these days, and that's admitted by the AIDS establishment. There was a huge study. It showed up in the Lancet magazine, which is a very well-received, prestigious science magazine. It was August 5th of last year, 2006. This study followed 22,000 patients starting in 1996 through 2005. And what they were trying to do was to find out how this antiretroviral therapy, it's actually called HAART, highly active antiretroviral therapy, how much better it was doing these days than it was doing in 1996. You know what they found out?
What's that?
That it is worse today than it ever was. There was no decrease in the death rate. There was loss of CD4 cells on these drugs. There was a faster progression to AIDS. More people were getting AIDS on these drugs, and what's called a worsening of the clinical progression. The drugs today are even worse than they were 10 years ago, and they were bad back then.
Now, what about like sending your book or getting in touch with Magic Johnson for some awareness or something? Well, we got to take a break. We'll talk about when we come back. Getting some kind of somebody to stand up there in front that can actually penetrate that cloak of our quote-free media. We have a caller here. So, hello, you're on the air with Dr. Stephen Davis. Hello.
Hello, this is Bill in Asheville, North Carolina.
Bill in Asheville, welcome to the show.
Hello, Dr. Davis. A question for me. If you've had some mild immune problems, like maybe a severe cold, or in my case, I had a case of shingles, the doctors, they just don't know, how to treat you fully, and, they look at me and they just automatically want to take you through an HIV regimen, HIV test, and I just feel like at that point they can wash their hands of any other type of test to figure out what may be wrong. Do you have a comment on that? How do you get around these guys, these doctors, that's all the only thing they can think about?
But Bill, you're absolutely right. What's happening these days is that rather than treating the specific diseases like shingles or cervical cancer or some of the other diseases that are classified as AIDS, rather than treating them as we have for years, we now lump them all into the category of AIDS, and we try to feed people these antiretroviral drugs. I don't know whether doctors are getting kickbacks to prescribe these drugs. I don't know whether they're not wanting to research things on their own and just follow the well-worn path. I don't know what's going on with it. I don't really believe that doctors are intentionally trying to hurt you. I don't believe doctors are out there to kill you. I just believe that they're misguided. For example, when the Centers for Disease Control last May came out with their recommendations that everyone in the United States be tested for HIV, the American Medical Association endorsed it right away. And what that means is that more and more people are going to be diagnosed HIV positive based on a false positive, because, as I said earlier, these tests, first of all, are totally unreliable in themselves. But secondly, when you start taking an antibody test like that and you start applying it to people outside of the main risk group, you get more and more false positives. So what we're going to do is put people through intense emotional stress and psychological trauma for absolutely no reason. I just was talking to somebody the other day who was diagnosed HIV positive 10 years ago, and now all of a sudden he's HIV negative. But what an unbelievable 10 years that was to live through. Bill, you may have your own experience you want to share.
Well, I was tested negative on a Tuesday and positive on a Friday in the same week.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty typical of these tests, I can tell you. They are
it's like you said earlier, Dr. Davis, it's rough. And the medical establishment just wants to keep taking you down those paths because it's much easier for them. And I'm trying to find some other ways to rebuild my immune system, get healthy without going down that path.
Absolutely.
Sure sounds like Armageddon to me with the CDC's new guidelines.
Well, you know what? I think James even alluded to this earlier. This whole issue can be a great opportunity for people to take a look at how easily we can be made afraid. This is how I got into this issue, James. Back in the early, because I'm not gay, I'm not HIV positive. I actually didn't have any gay friends until recently. I didn't even know anybody who was HIV positive until recently, and I've never known anybody with AIDS or lost a loved one to AIDS. I got into this because in the early 1990s, the government was trying to make people afraid of having sex, and that pissed me off, to be very honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
But it's an indication of how easily we can go into fear. And again, look at the TV. I mentioned this earlier. Look at all these ads now for all these new diseases. All of those ads are based on one premise: make somebody afraid of what their body's feeling so they'll buy your drug to cure it. And we need to take this opportunity with HIV and AIDS to recognize it's a chance for us to realize that we have to stop trusting the authorities. We have to take our lives into our own hands, to take responsibility for our own lives, and stop being so afraid. And, if that's what comes out of this whole issue, it'll be a big step forward for mankind.
All right. Well, thanks for the call.
Thank you very much, Dr. Davis.
You're welcome, Bill.
All right. There we go.
James, I might, if you give me just a second,
sure.
Because some of these people who have emailed in or called in and can't get through, if they want to send me an email, I just want to direct them to my website, which is www.theaidstrial.com, and they can email me from that page as well as, seeing the book and so forth. But I'd be happy to receive emails from anybody, perhaps people who have not answered their question or who disagree with my answer or whatever.
Because a lot of this is going to be a question of a big wake-up call. Like, it's not that the people are ignorant or stupid, or it's like, wait a minute, this is important, this is big, this is something, and they're going to want to have more. But it's like 9/11, when I actually investigated into the physics behind the buildings, and especially building 7 that collapsed, the third building. There's no way it could have collapsed from the fire. It's like, well, it's too big to tackle if you get to, like, well, if that's true, then this. You can't go there. You got to stay right here and deal with the evidence and let that blind justice take you where you got to go.
Yes. And, again, a lot of the people that call me who are alive today, having been diagnosed HIV positive, all say it's because they refuse to follow their doctor's orders. Now, doctors in the past have been someone we have wanted to trust without question, and we just can't do that anymore. We really can't. We have to begin to question where the doctor is coming from and to get second opinions. And now that we have the Internet, it is so easy to get information about whatever our question is, and especially our medical condition, that it's incumbent upon people now to start questioning their doctor, asking their doctor to prove what they're saying by providing the scientific studies. Back up whatever claim the doctor is making. Because literally, James, this is a matter of life or death. Now, just before the break, you asked about Magic Johnson, and we need to get somebody like that. Well, I wanted to announce tonight that there is a brand new video that will be on YouTube and Google. As a matter of fact, it's there right now. I just put it on there tonight, featuring Lee Evans, two-time Olympic gold medal winner. He held 3 world records in track and field. He's a member of the U.S. Track and Field Hall of Fame, the U.S. Olympic Hall of Fame. This is a class act, and Lee Evans is talking about all the things that are wrong with the HIV tests. So we're beginning to get some really key people, some important people, some people that people will trust to start talking about this. As I said, it's been very dangerous in the past because the AIDS establishment has tried to crush anyone who would like to voice some kind of dissent about this. And one of the reasons I got into this issue was because I have nothing to lose. I mean, I'm 60 years old. I've had a phenomenal life. They can't do anything to me. And so I decided I'm going to stand up and speak out.
Well, that's good. I still think they can do something to you. I mean, dying is one thing. I mean, they can only kill you. So, I mean, if that ever came down to it, and if it's true, which appears, what's going on, then, you know, murder in the overt, dirty sense, so to speak, it wouldn't be out of the question either.
Oh, the rumors are it's happened before. Again,
but I also think it's totally true, okay? But I also think at this point there is a force on this planet. Call it spiritual, call it like the Holy Spirit, call it the universe, perhaps even, I don't know, good aliens, I don't know, whatever, angels. But I think what's out there is just waiting for us to stand up and make a stand, and there is not only our inside powers that we can bring out and say no, like in The Matrix, one of my favorite movies. When he just says no, the bullets stop. We don't realize how strong we are. They do, and that's why they've spent thousands, years, I guess, keeping us down.
And I totally agree with you. I happen to call it the universe. And from everything I can see, the energy is building to break this issue wide open, this particular issue. Well, lots of issues. But there's a lot of energy right now about bringing out the truth of HIV and AIDS. There's TV shows. In Mexico, they just carried 3 hours of a TV show about the things that you and I have talked about tonight. It shook up the nation down there. I have an hour TV program from South Africa. There's videos being made. If people go to helpforhiv.com, first of all, right at the top, there's links for them to look at this Lee Evans video on the HIV test. But there's also links to 30 hours of podcasts, radio and TV interviews like the ones you and I are doing, videos that people can watch. There is energy building, which I am hopeful and actually expect will, in the next couple years, result in lawsuits that are going to bring the truth out. I think that's what's going to happen, James. I think we're going to have to hear all this in a court of law because I think judges and courtrooms is one of the last places that we put some faith despite the O.J. verdict. Yeah. Well, it seems that my gut, not to be a fearmonger, my gut is telling me that they're losing a little bit, but they're also not worried about it because they got like 5 other plans. And to me, there's like a bunch of families running the planet, like kind of like the model of the old mobsters, only they're a little bit more sophisticated. And it's like, okay, if you don't do it our way and go to sleep and let us whatever, well then we'll do it the hard way. So it's like, if we wake up, okay, we'll play harder ball. But then we got that spiritual the wild card that no one's taken into consideration. Yeah, as I said, I totally agree, and I believe the universe has a lot of help out there to offer for those of us who want to stand up and go to the window and yell, "I'm mad as hell. I'm not going to take it anymore." And those who are diagnosed HIV positive, who who will not just give in to the doctor's orders and start taking the drugs, and those who are not HIV positive, who find the righteous indignation about all this. I mean, again, this is where I'm coming from. I just cannot sit by and watch while we kill people in this country. I don't care how many it is, and we kill people in Africa based on absolute lie, and backed up by nothing, no scientific basis, no scientific research, no scientific studies whatsoever. So,
I have a thing here from a listener who said that Magic Johnson would not be able to be a spokesman because he has sold out and is now a spokesman for one of the drug companies. Well, I don't know if that, it's just his statement. I don't know if it's true or not, but if he is a spokesman, that's one way to get him kind of buried away by bringing him on the team, so to speak, even though he didn't do his thing.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute. Magic Johnson is on the payroll of GlaxoSmithKline, the company that makes many of the antiretroviral drugs, including the two that still have AZT in it. He is on their payroll. His picture appears in some ads for one of their drugs like Combivir. If you look at that picture, Magic Johnson's face is there. He's not smiling. And on the opposite page, it talks about taking Combivir, taking these drugs. However, it is not a quote from Magic Johnson. Magic Johnson's name never appears attributed to that quote, and there is no other association between Magic Johnson and the drug other than his picture, which he is paid to allow them to use. If you look at another ad for Natrol, which is a natural immune-boosting therapy, Magic's smiling. He's talking about, I take this every day. It's in quotes. He has his name there. Magic, excuse me, you will not hear Magic talk about people taking the antiretroviral drugs. You'll talk about his AIDS education, which is his big thing, which is okay. But Magic can't stand up and say he takes the drugs because he doesn't. He's on a natural therapy. He's got a Tibetan doctor. So, one day I hope Magic will come right out and say, no, I never took the drugs, and that's why I'm alive.
Can you, another message coming here, can you speak about the, quote, new designer drug that is being put out to all women to prevent cervical cancer?
No, I can't.
Okay.
Because I have not studied it. I can't refer you to the scientific studies about it. I have questions about HPV and the designer drug for HPV, but I honestly do not know enough to even speak about it.
Another thing coming in, don't forget Bill Gates has come under some major criticism for sending health drugs to Africa while the chemical plants in the backyard of those getting those drugs are making people sick. He needs to have him he needs to have a book sent to him too.
I've sent him a book. I've sent Oprah a book. I've sent a lot of people a book. And again, it's one of these days, one of these guys are going to wake up. One of these very caring individuals, because I have to think that they really have a good heart and good intentions. They're just misguided. They just don't know the facts. And one of these days, the facts are going to get to them, and that's when this whole house of cards is going to come tumbling down.
Well, I also like how you spoke about Magic Johnson very articulately to point out that this may be something that his contract is allowing more than he. It shows that you're not just going out looking to sling names or sling mud, or that you really want to find the truth, and you're willing to, give people the proper credit or not credit when it's due or not due.
Yeah, there are some not so good people that have been involved in this. Dr. Robert Gallo is one of those I mentioned, who started this whole thing in 1984. Dr. Anthony Fauci, who still heads the National Institute of Allergic and Infectious Diseases, and he's a kingpin. And Mark Weinberg, who is head of some international AIDS organization, who wants to put anybody who says the things I'm saying in jail. Oh, speaking of that, James, let me tell you about this. This is from a June 26th, 2006 article in the New York Times. They want to open an HIV jail in New York. I don't know whether you're familiar with it, but New York City started this program in the early 90s for tuberculosis. There were people who had TB who were not taking their medications. And so they started a program called Direct Observation Therapy, or DOT. And they would send a healthcare worker out to monitor and make sure these people were taking their tuberculosis medications. The ones who refused to take the drugs or didn't take them properly could have been and were taken without their agreement and put in and locked up in a ward of Bellevue Hospital, which became known as the TB jail. And they could be kept there for as much as 2 years while they were force-fed the tuberculosis medication. New York City is now seriously considering doing the same thing for HIV positives who don't want to or fail or refuse to take the HIV drugs. In other words, they're looking at developing an HIV jail as the solution to that problem. This is how far these people will go to maintain this lie and to enforce their own views on anybody else.
Well, now I know why they will. Is because the reason why I'm thinking, like, they can't be that scared of getting it. Now I know why they will, because if people don't get the disease and are healthy and happy, that's the scare.
Yes.
If somebody comes up to be HIV negative, they have to be removed, because if they live and do good, they will end up becoming, wait a minute, what about this guy? What did he do?
Yeah.
And then if they actually really studied it and found out the things you're talking about, that would show, oh, God. Well, it's got to be done. That's just it. I mean, I mentioned in the show at the beginning of this year, one of the things is I want to support people who are coming out and making stands. They're putting themselves out at risk. They're not out to gain a bunch of money and controversy. In fact, they're out to lose money and their positions and their jobs and be blackballed and all that stuff. That we have a obligation to support the people so that they don't come out and do this and then just get tucked away neatly somewhere else.
Absolutely. And I'm very grateful to you, and you should be congratulated for even allowing me on the air, because it's not been very often that we've been allowed media time. And we're still not, of course, on prime time or 2020, but that'll come also. But I thank you for allowing people like me to come on and try to tell the truth and try to support that truth with the scientific studies that are available for anybody to read, because that's all I really want to do. I really want to say, hey, the science does not support what is happening in the world, either here or in Africa. And so few people are aware that that's the case. And I want to make it available. That's why I started the website, helpforhiv.com. It offers people the chance to go read some of these scientific studies, read the articles, read the newspaper clippings, read all this that has been talked about and exposed, and listen to the podcast and watch the videos, and actually communicate with other people who are HIV positive. There's another website called livingwithouthivdrugs.com. Stories of people who are HIV positive, who may have even taken the drugs for a while and discovered what a big mistake that was, sometimes by getting very sick, and no longer take the drugs, and how they are now living happy and healthy lives without the drugs. They still carry this stigma of being HIV positive, and that's still affecting people today. I mean, you never get rid of this, and that's the other unfortunate thing, is that once you're diagnosed HIV positive, it's very seldom that you'll ever be able to turn that around, because the thing that caused you to be diagnosed HIV positive on these fraudulent HIV tests was probably some other disease that you had that created the same antibodies that reacted on the test. In other words, a false positive. Once we develop antibodies, we keep them forever because they're good things to have. They protect us from diseases, so our body carries them forever. So once somebody has a false positive HIV test, they're most likely going to have that for the rest of their lives. It means they have to deal with this and live with this stigma forever. That's one of the things I hope we can change so that people can step out of the fear and step out of the stigma and begin to lead normal, healthy lives again.
All right. Well, this is what I say for people who are listening to the show now live, and there are many more who listen to it in its archival form. On the website, this show is split up into 2 files because it's a 4-hour show, and the second file just so happens to be all of this part, these last 2 hours. So what I want people to do is download. It's free. The archives are free. There's, I try to have commercial time. In fact, I ended up cutting out a couple of my own commercials to get more information out here. Is download this thing and send it to other places. Send it to coast, or give them the link. I don't think they'll appreciate you sending it, but give them a link to it and say, look, you got to hear this guy. Rents, Alex Jones. There's all these other people out there who have dealt with these types of issues. I don't know about actually AIDS, but at least CDC and the government control and all this stuff. Send it out to these places, then start sending it to and linking it to however you can do it, tastefully do it, so that some of these other media outlets can listen to it. Yeah, I mean, there's not a lot of little, there's not too many commercials in it, so it's not trying to push anything other than what we have here, Stephen is saying. So send this out, or send the links out, or whatever. I will leave this up on the archives. It'll be there for, ever, so people do this. Here's a way to share it, and it's put in a 2-hour form, so that, hey, we got how about Rosie O'Donnell? We got a person, Rosie.com. We got a person saying, send Rosie O'Donnell a book. She's too hard. It's too hard to ignore her, or something. So, I mean, this is the deal here. We have a zillion. What is that? 3 degrees from everybody on the planet? I don't know what that phrase is.
6 degrees, yeah.
6 degrees. Everyone could send it out, send a link out. It's free. There's no problem. There's no pirating. No to worry about nothing. I'm sitting here going, I'm giving my blessing. I'm asking you to send this information out so this can get around. I mean, that's what we're here for. I mean, this is the whole kind of this second media here is because the gatekeepers at the top, for whatever reason, monetarily or otherwise, are preventing information going out that allows genocide to happen on this planet. I mean, there's no other way to describe it but the systematic destruction of at least a particular life on this planet. Talk about, the racism, and we hear the racism card in politics, we hear this and that. It's like, send it to Jesse Jackson. I'm in Chicago, I'll send it to him. Send it to these individuals who are, and say, look, here is a real racial issue here where people are dying. And let's get something going here. I don't know. That's all we can do is pass it along and send along a little prayer love energy with it, like give it a little bump that maybe at least let the people listen to it. Because once you listen to it, how could you turn away from it?
Yeah, I totally agree, and I appreciate that a lot. And this is going to have to be a grassroots movement. I don't think Dr. Robert Gallo or Dr. Anthony Fauci or Mark Weinberg are going to all of a sudden stand up tomorrow and say, oops, we've been wrong for 22 years.
Well, we're coming to the end here, and before we get out, I want to make sure people are asking how to get a hold of you again, so give that information out.
You can send me an email. Go to my website, www.theaidstrial.com, and there's a link on there to send me an email. Also, go to helpforhiv.com. Take a look at the Lee Evans video, brand new, and you can actually send email through that website as well. And I'll be happy to receive emails from anybody.
All right, and I will get an email to you giving you a link to this so you can spread it around, or if you want to put the show on your site, however you want to do it.
I'm definitely going to do that, James.
All right, we'll get the ball rolling here. So, all right, I appreciate you doing what you're doing, and we're going to do what we can do and see what we can do about this.
Thank you, sir, so much.
All righty, there you go, Dr. Stephen Davis, wrongful death, the AIDS on trial. Well, it's up to you now. He did his thing, I did my thing. Let's continue to spread the word and just, how about truth?